All right, today is day 4, and we are finally getting into some real anatomy stuff. Of course, cells are part of anatomy, but now we're going to really get into the tissues and then the organ systems that everyone has been looking forward to. All right, I'm going to spend today talking about tissues. The study of tissues is called histology, and there's 4 types of tissues that I want to cover. So we talked yesterday and the day before about individual cells. So now at this point, when you have a group of cells that are together and that are expressing the same DNA, meaning they then have the same job, so they have similar structure and function. Those are called tissues. All right, and our 4 types of tissues are epithelium, connective, muscle, and nervous. And I'm going to go over each one of those today. All right, and then there's your pretty picture right there to represent each one. So the way that tissues are studied is they are fixed or preserved and cut into thin sections or sliced, and then they're stained and then they're put on a slide and they're studied under the microscope. So all of the pictures that I show you today and all of the pictures that you're looking at in your lab, well, it's not really a lab. If you were in the classroom, we would do today's activity using an actual microscope and slides, but today you're just going to pretend that you've looked at them under a microscope and that's what you're actually seeing. So everything you look at today, all the pictures that you see, will have been preserved, cut into slices, stained, and then put on a slide for you. So just so you know, that's what you're actually looking at today. So our first type of tissue is called epithelial tissue. Epith meaning laid on or covering. And what this type of tissue does is it covers and it lines everything. All right, so we have your skin, we have the inside of your mouth, the inside of your lungs, the inside and the outside of all of your organs, the inside and outside of your stomach. This is just the lining and the covering of everything. And so if it lines and it covers, obviously it's going to be for protection. It helps with absorption. So if you think about the epithelial tissue of your stomach, it's going to help with absorption. Epithelial tissue in your lungs is going to help with gas exchange. Epithelial tissue in your kidneys is going to help with filtration. So the lab you did yesterday with the kidney, that would be epithelial tissue that osmosis and diffusion is actually occurring across. And then for the endocrine system, the glands are going to have this kind of tissue that's involved in the secretion of hormones. And I got to make sure I'm giving you enough time to fill in these blanks. I'm going to shuffle around so I can look at my paper here. All right. And I think you had some blanks to fill in before. So you may have needed to pause to write down the 4 different types of tissue. And then here you're not writing anything down, so I can move on. So the special properties of epithelial tissue is that they fit close together to form continuous sheets. And that's because epithelial tissue is like the clothing for your organs, right? So they're going to form sheets. They are supported by connective tissue, and connective tissue is the second type. And so that's going to make sense. So connective tissue is kind of like the glue that holds it all together. So they go hand in hand. Epithelial and connective go hand in hand. There's no blood supply, so they're called avascular. And what they are relying on is the connective tissue, the glue tissue, for the diffusion of nutrients and oxygen and whatnot. The hallmark of epithelial tissue is that it can regenerate really quickly. So it can replace lost cells, which makes sense. If it's the lining and the protection, then some cells are going to get damaged or sloughed off. And so epithelial tissue can regenerate really quickly. All right, our classification. Classification of epithelial tissue is determined by how many layers of cells and the shape of the cells. Okay, and so our cell layers could either be simple or stratified. Simple means one layer, stratified means multiple layers. And this is what the picture is showing you. So simple, one layer, stratified, multiple layers. So at this point, I would ask the question, which one do you think you would find on the inside of your mouth? Would you find simple or would you find stratified? And I hope that you would answer stratified. And the reason for that is there's a lot that goes on in your mouth and you don't realize, well, you do realize it every time you eat Captain Crunch cereal. My kids beg for Captain Crunch cereal all the time. And I buy it, and then I end up eating like most of it. But every time I eat Captain Crunch cereal, I'm telling you, it wreaks havoc on like the roof of my mouth. Um, Yet I continue to eat it because it's so worth it, because it's so good. But the point I'm trying to make is there's a lot that goes on when you eat, and there's actually a lot of cells that get pulled off, scraped off, sloughed off when every time you eat. So you need stratified multiple layers to make up for. So there's constant regeneration underneath, and then you have this layer right here that's about to get torn off by Captain Crunch cereal. Hopefully that made sense. And then you would have simple, probably most likely in the simple would be in your lungs. And the reason for that is you want oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse across. So you don't want multiple layers because then it would be too difficult. You want a single layer for gas exchange to occur. So this kind of goes back to that whole form fits function type of deal that we talked about in the beginning. All right, then you have a classification based on shape. So squamous, if you turn it a certain way, it's going to look like that. But really squamous, I think of them as being kind of oval and flat, plate-like. You're going to find that in your lungs. Cuboidal, a cube. Columnar is going to look like a column. So when you put the two together, when you put layer and then shape together, you end up with one layer of oval would be simple squamous. Multiple layers of the oval flat ones would be stratified squamous. And then it goes on and on. One layer, cube, multiple layers, cubed, one layer, column, sort of multiple layers, column. And then you have transitional that has multiple layers, but it has the different cell types. You can see cuboidal and you can see columnar in there. And I am going to stop there with epithelial tissue because your entire assignment today, not the entire thing, the bulk of it, is going to be an exploration of tissue samples under the microscope, and you're going to get to see where in the human body are all of these different types of epithelium found. And so I'm moving on from epithelial tissue. Let's go to connective tissue. So this is our second type. Connective tissue is the most abundant and widely distributed, and our main classes are going to be what's called connective tissue proper. So you're loose and you're dense. And I'm going to show you loose and dense, but just in case you're wondering, loose would be like your fat adipose tissue. Dense would be like your ligaments and tendons. Okay, second type of connective tissue is cartilage. You would find that in your ear and your nose. And I'm actually gonna go back over all of these. So we'll just go ahead and list them and then I'll talk about each one. Bone is a type of connective tissue. And then blood is a type of connective tissue. So we'll get those four written down. The functions, binding and support. So now you can see why bone would be under that, and cartilage and ligaments and tendons. Protection, cartilage definitely protects. Insulation, a lot of your loose tissue is for insulation. That's your adipose or fat tissue. And then finally transport. So then that makes sense why blood would be on the list of connective tissue. All right, so I'm going back up here to number one, and then I'm going to go down each one of these and talk about each one of these briefly. All right, dense connective tissue are tendons and ligaments. So remember, tendons and ligaments are what's going to attach bone together and blood together, and not blood, sorry, attach bone together and then attach muscle to bone. So you can remember a tendon is going to attach muscle to bone. And the way I remember that is that they're called chicken tenders, and chicken itself is actually a muscle. And then every once in a while when you eat chicken, you get a tendon and it's so gross. Ligaments are going to attach two bones together. So tendon is muscle to bone, ligament is bone to bone. All right, and then you have what's called dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. So dense regular is going to be the subclass is going to cover ligaments and tendons. Dense irregular is it's the connective tissue that you're going to find under your skin, and then the elastic dense connective tissue is usually going to be found mostly on your blood vessels, in your blood vessels, so it helps them be elastic. All right, the structure is going to be mainly collagen fibers. So remember, collagen is a protein. Collagen is the protein, like I said before, so just for reference, it's the protein that gives your skin its elasticity, and it's the protein that breaks down and causes the appearance of aging as someone gets older. Okay, the functions are to ensure elasticity and to resist tension so that tearing doesn't happen. And then the names of the cells that create this dense connective tissue are called fibroblasts. All right, and then here's the location. So tendons, ligaments, and then the lower layers of the skin. And then also the elastic dense connective tissue can be found in the blood vessels. All right, here's a picture of dense, regular connective tissue under the microscope. You can see here's a shoulder joint, here's a ligament, putting the two bones together. Here's a tendon that's attaching the muscle to the bone. And this is what it looks like under the microscope. It's kind of pretty because it's kind of wavy. And then there's the nuclei, and remember the cells are called fibroblasts. So they're parallel collagen fibers, and they're kind of wavy. This is the loose connective tissue that I talked about a minute ago. So remember, dense connective tissue would be your tendons, your ligaments. Loose connective tissue is going to be associated with adipose. So adipose is another name for fat. And so that kind of makes sense because if you touched and looked at a ligament or tendon and like felt it in your hand, it would probably feel pretty dense and hard. And then when you feel fat, it's kind of like soft and squishy and loose. So that's a good way to remember it. And then it's just showing you the adipose tissue that's underneath the mammary glands. And so that'll be usually found under the skin, around the kidneys and the eyeballs. Interesting because, I mean, you have to have cushion for your eyeballs, and then abdomen, and then the breast. All right, and then it can serve as insulation against heat loss, and then support and protection. All right, so that's dense, then loose connective tissue. Now I'm going to talk about cartilage. So you have different subclasses of cartilage. You have hyaline, which is considered clear cartilage that's found in your joints and a few other places I'll mention in a second. Elastic, also known as yellow cartilage, is a cartilage you'd find in your ear or your nose. And then fibrocartilage is considered really tough cartilage that's found in your vertebrate. And we all know cartilage is there for, it's sort of elastic, it's real bendy, and it can take impact, and it can take a lot of pressure. So it's really there to be flexible and to protect, basically. So it has no nerves or blood, and it's for support and compression. So that makes sense, especially the cartilage found in your vertebrate. The cells are called chondroblasts and chondrocytes. It's just the name of the cells. And then the locations, lots of places. Larynx, which is found in your throat, joints, nose, ear, vertebrate, your breastbone, and then your knee joint. And then here's just a picture. This shows the cartilage that's connected to your rib cage. So the reason why you would need cartilage connected to your rib cage is because your rib cage moves when you breathe, and so you've got to have a little bit of bendiness to it, a bendability and flexibility, so you can breathe easier without breaking a rib, basically. And this picture is just showing you chondrocytes and hyaline cartilage from the trachea. So remember, hyaline cartilage is considered that clear cartilage. And this goes over the description that I already basically said: supports, reinforces, and provides cushioning. Okay, so this picture is just for a reference. Sorry I couldn't put colored pictures in your manual. I wanted to. I intended on doing it, but I didn't have access to a colored printer. All right, next type of tissue. This is connective tissue still. So remember, we went through dense and loose. Then we talked about cartilage. Now we're talking about bone, then we're going to talk about blood. So these are all the connective tissues. All right, so bone is also known as osseous tissue. You have a compact and spongy. So you can remember compact bone is if you're picturing a bone in your mind, it's what you see on the outside. It's the hard covering on the outside, and then spongy bone is going to be on the inside. So it's a hard calcified matrix that has blood vessels interworked um, within it. Its function is for support and protection. It stores calcium. In bone marrow is where white blood cells are formed. And then the cells are called osteoblasts and osteocytes. And the location of bone is going to be in your bones. It's going to be easy to remember. And I think bone looks so cool under the microscope. It's like these circles right here. They look really cool, I think. And just the same information, hard calcified matrix. It contains some collagen fibers. The cells are called osteocytes. The purpose of bones is it's for structure, obviously, but bones are also going to aid in movement because muscle is going to attach to the bone so that you can move. All right, and that's it for bone. So our fourth type of connective tissue is blood. Blood is considered vascular tissue. The subclasses are your blood cells, your red and white blood cells, and then plasma, which is the liquid that surrounds your blood cells. It is the fluid within blood vessels. There's no fiber, so there's nothing that's holding it in place. And the reason for that is because it's a transport vehicle. So blood isn't just red blood cells. That's usually what we think of when we think of blood. Blood is red blood cells, white blood cells, and the plasma fluid. And so it is a transport vehicle for nutrients, waste, gases, and hormones. And like I just said a minute ago, the cells are going to be white blood cells, also known as leukocytes. Red blood cells, also known as erythrocytes. And then platelets. Platelets are going to be those proteins that are involved in blood clotting. And they're located within the blood vessels, which you already knew. And here is a view of that under the microscope. So it's showing you what's called a neutrophil. A neutrophil is a type of white blood cell. A lymphocyte, right here, is a type of white blood cell. And then you have your red blood cells, which are going to carry oxygen. They're going to have a protein called hemoglobin on them so they can carry oxygen. And then the plasma is surrounding. All right, our third type of tissue is called muscle tissue. This is the easiest one, I think. There's three types. There's skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. So I'm going to give you kind of a second to write that down. Skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. And I'm going to go through each one of these and what they are. So skeletal, cardiac, smooth, if you didn't get those written down. If you didn't, go ahead and pause. I'm going to go through each one. Skeletal muscle is going to have a long cylindrical appearance. They're multinucleated. They have more than one nuclei per cell. And the reason for that is because there is so much protein that has to be produced that more than one nucleus is necessary. They take on a striated or banded appearance, and I'm going to show you that in just a second in the picture. The purpose of skeletal muscle is for voluntary movement. Voluntary movement. This is muscle that is attached to bones. And it is involved in the involuntary control. So when you choose to lift your arm, you're choosing to use skeletal muscle. Okay, so you're writing down voluntary control. All right, and this picture is going to show you a slice of skeletal muscle under the microscope, and it's showing you the tricep muscle. So you see how it's long, cylindrical, and then it takes a banded appearance. The reason for that banded appearance and the striation is because there is a contractile unit for each one of these bands that causes the muscle to contract quickly for voluntary movement. All right. Cardiac muscle, as the name implies, it is found in the heart. It is also striated. It takes on a banded appearance. It's uninucleated, so only one nucleus. And then you're going to find branching cells that fit at junctions, and those are called intercalated discs. And so just to kind of to simplify this, cardiac muscle cells are going to each fit together with kind of a little door between them, an open door. So each cardiac muscle cell is going to have a little open door between each one, and that is so ions, charged ions, can flow through and can help propagate an electrical conduction so that the heart can contract. And when we get into the cardiovascular system, I think next week, I want to say it's on Thursday next week. I can't remember exactly, but we're going to talk about the contraction and the electrical conduction of the heart, which is pretty interesting. So the job of cardiac muscles to propel blood through blood vessels. And cardiac muscles are found in the walls of the heart. Those of you that got the giant pig heart, this was not a little pig that they took it from. So when you got your organs, those of you that got the brain or the heart, you look at the brain, you're like, huh, I thought it was going to be bigger than that. No, that's what a sheep brain looks like. They're very small. And then when you get the pig heart, you're like, whoa, I thought it was going to be smaller than that. No, they took it from a freaking giant pig. Some of y'all have more giant hearts than others, but they can get pretty big. So be prepared to saw through that heart if you got a heart. It's going to take a little muscle to do it. All right, and the heart is involved in involuntary control. You can't consciously make your heart beat. So that's considered involuntary. All right, and this is what the heart muscle would look like under a microscope. See how it's kind of branching? It's not like perfect parallel strips like your skeletal muscle. It's kind of branching. And then you have these intercalated discs. And remember, the discs are going to help with the flow of ions, which is going to help with or is going to cause the electrical conduction. And then when you look at the heart, this is where the muscle is going to be. And then these hollow parts, those are going to be your atria and ventricles where blood is actually going to fill up. So the heart is so cool. Can't wait for us to talk about the heart next week. Okay, smooth muscle. Smooth muscle, no visible striations, one central nucleus. Smooth muscle is going to propel substances through hollow organs, and it's going to be found in the stomach, bladder, uterus, and blood vessels. So that's smooth muscle. It is also involuntary control like cardiac muscle, and it contracts slowly in a process called peristalsis. So peristalsis, you can think of your stomach and your small and large intestine. It's a slow wave-like motion that moves food through your small intestine. So peristalsis is a description of the movement or contractions of your small intestine in particular. I love that word, peristalsis. Okay, so that's smooth muscle. It's just your organs that don't involve your skeletal muscle or your heart. It's all the other muscle, basically. And that's what it's going to look like under the microscope. So it's going to be spindle-shaped cells with a central nuclei, no striations, and they're closely to form sheets. All right, and it's going to propel substances or are going to be involved in some of your other organs, just involuntary control, and it's mostly found in the digestive tract. All right, moving on to the fourth type of tissue is called nervous tissue. It is the main component of the nervous system, and the structure is going to be a neuron. So right here is shown a neuron. This is the cell of the nervous system. It has a cell body, and then it has these little branches coming out, and then it has this long tail. And the function of the nervous tissue is to regulate and control all body functions. And your brain, your spinal cord, and your nerves are all going to be made up of neurons and is going to be part of this nervous system. Right, so the neurons are going to respond to stimuli, transmit electrical impulses, and other cells involved in the nervous tissue are going to support, insulate, and protect neurons. I'm going to leave it at that with nervous tissue because we are going to spend 2 days on the nervous system, and I'll talk more about the structure of a neuron and how a neuron works, and then I'll talk about the cells that are there to support neurons. But basically, this is what the nervous tissue looks like under the microscope. I'd say out of all of the ones we looked at, this is like the messiest and most chaotic looking one. But I'd say out of the four tissue types, this is the most interesting one to talk about. And so I'm also equally, if not more, excited to talk about nervous system next week. And we'll get to more of these details, but basically just know the basic information of that. Okay, those are the four types of tissues. I'm going to talk briefly about tissue repair and then stem cells, and then you can, these notes are very, I think they're pretty basic, pretty straightforward. It's a lot of information, but they're straightforward, so I probably won't need to go back and explain much of this. I'm probably going to talk about stem cells in the meeting tomorrow. But in order to talk about stem cells, I first need to talk about tissue repair and why stem cells are necessary. So there's 3 steps in tissue repair. So if tissue gets damaged, the first thing that happens is you have inflammation. All inflammation is capillary walls expanding, filling with blood, and then white blood cells and other fluids permeating out of the capillaries into the tissues. So when you think of inflammation, you think of swelling and redness. Well, what makes it red is the blood. What makes it swell is, well, the blood vessels are expanding and a bunch of fluid is being sent to that area. So inflammation is a good thing, but one of the chemicals that gets sent to the area are pain signals. And so this is where pain comes in. It's a signal, hey, we're inflamed down here. Even though the inflammation's good, we need you to know that capillaries are expanding, white blood cells are going to this area, and you need to do something about it. So during inflammation, that's when you'll also have blood clots form. Okay, so you have damage, and then you have inflammation, and then you have a blood clot that just formed. The second step to tissue repair is when granulation forms, granulation tissue forms. And so right here, you'll have granulation tissue. So this is like the mending process, the very beginning of the mending process. So collagen will come in. You'll have epithelial cells multiply. All right, and that's really all I want you to know is granulation is the second step where you have new capillaries, new collagen fibers, and new epithelial cells come into the damaged area. And then the third step is the more fibrous tissue is going to mature and it's going to harden and it's going to form scar tissue. Right? So scarring is the third step. Certain types of tissue are going to regenerate more easily and repair more easily than others. And so I'm showing you this chart here to let you know that your skin, your mucous membranes, your fibrous connective tissue, which is under your skin, your blood and your bones are going to regenerate extremely well. So if you have damage to any of these, you're guaranteed you're going to be fine. It's going to regenerate itself. Smooth muscles in the digestive tract, tendons and ligaments, moderately well. We're still okay. Then when we get into this weak and this virtually none regenerative capacity, that's when we have to start worrying about the ability to repair. So skeletal muscle and cartilage are weak. This is why it takes forever for a skeletal muscle tear or a cartilage tear to heal. Forever, it feels like. And then virtually none, and it's mostly scar tissue, is going to be your cardiac and your nervous tissue. So your brain, your spinal cord, and your heart. So what can we do about this virtually none? What can we do about that? Well, there's these things called stem cells. Stem cells are cells that have not taken on a job yet. So it's a cell, it's like a brand new baby cell where unlimited options, right? So it could be anything that it wants to be. Once it is committed to a job, segments of DNA gets turned off, segments of DNA gets turned on, and the cell becomes differentiated and it is no longer a stem cell. It is a particular type of cell. For example, you have a stem cell, has no job whatsoever. It then has proteins that come in that turn certain segments of DNA off, certain segments of DNA on. And let's say, for example, that now this cell is differentiated to become a cardiac cell. It then is no longer a stem cell. So why are these useful? Okay, these are useful because Stem cells can be extracted, and this is where it gets a little controversial, can be extracted from embryos, cells that have no job. In a lab, these cells can then be exposed to certain proteins that force them to take on a job. And so that's where certain cells can become certain tissues and then be injected into a human who is having problems with a certain organ. And then now you have brand new cells. Okay, sounds great, right? Sounds perfect. The only problem is that so this is just showing you cell differentiation. So a stem cell will not have any segments of DNA turned on or off yet. Once certain proteins enter the area, it'll turn certain segments of DNA on or off, and then it'll become specialized and differentiated. And so stem cells, you have stem cells as an adult, but mostly the stem cells of an adult are going to become like blood or bone. And remember back in that chart, blood and bone can regenerate really easily. We don't even need those really that much. They can regenerate really easily, and it could be it's probably just because we have certain stem cells and because they can undergo mitosis really easily. But things like lung tissue, brain tissue, cardiac tissue, it's really useful to take stem cells from embryos and use them to regenerate these things in humans. And that is a very controversial topic that you will explore in your assignment today. I made it almost close to 30 minutes. I will have talked about, or if you're watching this lecture before our meeting, I will talk about our assignment today. So you will be exploring epithelial tissue and stem cells. And I will talk to you guys later.